Greetings, system failure listeners. Nate here, Brian over there. Brian, how you doing on a Sunday morning in October?
Hey Nate, I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Good. You were just talking about, before we heated up to the mics, that you had headed down to a Magic tournament in Massachusetts yesterday and did pretty well for yourself.
Yeah, it was pretty good. 32 people played. I went undefeated in the Swiss rounds. And then, in the top 8, I played against the guy who I beat in the quarterfinals of that Star City Games tournament way back when, the one that was on YouTube's or whatever.
Oh, really? And, that's interesting.
I guess that dude has a 12-year vendetta against me.
Against you? But wait. He defeated you, though, I thought.
No, I defeated him.
Oh, you defeated him? Okay.
It's not the guy I lost to in the finals,
I thought that's what you were saying. I see.
But, there were some close games, and it was fine. But it was cool to see that dude again after 12 years.
And so you defeated him again.
No, I lost him.
You lost him. Oh, so revenge is a dish best served cold. I see. I had the story flip-flopped here.
Yeah, that's what happened.
I see. Well, still, that's some pretty interesting intrigue.
But, see, he has also abandoned the sanctioned, loot box formats of Hasbro run Magic the Gathering for pre-modern, which is a refuge from such nonsense. And so it was good to see that he was doing that also now. So
it must be people are tired of SpongeBob themed Magic cards, right? It's we want to get back to some core. That's the core Magic experience. We don't want this nonsense with Spider-Man.
It's awesome. We're completely insulated from Spider-Man was the latest debacle of a Magic the Gathering release.
It's some things are just best, it's something just best left alone. But of course, Hasbro, the corporation, is going to be owned by some conglomerate, and that means they're going to have to keep churning out sets infinitely into the future with no end ever, and so that's how you end up scraping the bottom of the barrel and doing these Star Trek crossovers with Captain Picard Magic cards.
Well, at some point it clearly became cancerous growth rather than healthy growth.
It's growth for its own sake. The ethos of as you mentioned, both the cancer cell and the capitalist system of production. It's awesome. It's always fun.
Indeed.
Well, speaking of the old capitalist system of production, I guess there was some No Kings rallies yesterday. We had these back in June. Now, I have a mixed mind on the No Kings rallies. I just really like protest in general. I think that's a good muscle to flex. I oft lament that America, we have the Boston Tea Party in our DNA and other such revolts against imperialist authority, but we're not like the French who protest each and every little thing, tearing down traffic cameras and whatnot. So I do like to see Americans out there flexing their muscle. I don't quite understand the No Kings moniker. It does seem like the Donald has won an election. I just don't quite understand the Kings thing. I'd have to get someone to explain it to me. It's the man does seem to have won a legitimate election. Not quite sure why we've chosen this for the title, but still, it's good to see them out there protesting power.
Yeah, well, most of the protesters I see them in. Well, there's just people in the Monument Square holding up signs and whatnot, just on a daily basis. And these protests, I guess, tend to make me cringe because I feel like they're falling for the divide and conquer trick of our political elite, and they're basically out there protesting to Donald and rooting for whatever. I guess Gavin Newsom's going to be the left wing candidate. It's
Newsom.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you should mention falling for a trick because there was a strange article that popped up on our local WGME Maine Channel 13 website yesterday about the No Kings protest and how they were funded by George Soros. Not something I ever paid that much attention to. Does seem like plenty of people hate the Donald for whatever reason, which is what this protest is about. It doesn't seem like you would need George Soros to fund this thing, but I had never seen the mainstream media it's always something I hear talked about on podcasts, how Soros funds these things. But I'll just obviously so this was our own local news linked to this national this national story, and just the title is No Kings protests being funded by foundations run by George Soros report. And then they just talk about, how George Soros's Open Society Foundations is one of these groups that's founded by him and is funding these protests. So I don't know. Interesting to see the mainstream media acknowledging not that the mainstream media is remotely trustworthy, but it's interesting to see them acknowledging the George Soros connection, which I had previously assumed to be a conspiracy theory to be found in the darkest corners of the internet and never acknowledged by, popular. This is our local CBS affiliate that's linking to this story. So no need to read it, but the headline says it all. It's just really interesting.
Well, what I understand about George Soros is that he's figured out that trying to sway Senate elections, like national elections with money, is the juice. It just isn't worth the squeeze compared to doing stuff in local politics, and it's a lot easier to buy a local election than a national one. And so I don't really know, what does it mean that our local No Kings protest was funded by George Soros? Was he paying, was there a juice stand or something with free juices? Or, I don't know, how do you, or just someone was running it? Or, so,
I don't know what it means either. And nor do I know what it means that CBS affiliate is acknowledging this thing. Just very strange. It does seem like the local the mainstream media does everything it can to try to disqualify Trump in people's minds from being a serious president. And he does his mannerisms seem strange and off-putting. Because they are strange and off-putting. But I mean, the thing to me, the reason to protest the Donald is more foreign wars, funding foreign military operations in Ukraine and in Syria and Iran, and in Gaza, right? And taking us to war without congressional approval, and sending federal troops to Portland, Oregon. That doesn't really seem like it's a crazy or without precedent to me. I think about President Kennedy sending troops to the Deep South to enforce segregation in the 60s. These sorts of projections of federal power, they have a long history in America. Not that they're great, but... And that's the thing about the mainstream media. They have to attack the Donald not on the things that he does that are actual horrible crimes, because all the establishment, the regime, the normal, the Obamas and the Bidens and the Bushes do all this stuff too. Aggressive wars and warrantless wiretapping and having the government shut down dissenting voices on Twitter, or using military technology to kill American citizens without due process. I mean, the list is endless. The horrible things that all of Mr. Trump's predecessors have done, and he's just kind of continuing on with these ridiculous executive overreaches. But the mainstream media can't call him on that because they were big cheerleaders for the war in Iraq and all, and so it's they have to kind of pick on the Donald to try to criticize him for being uncouth instead of committing these horrible crimes that are impeachable, maybe even, offenses worthy of, charges in the international criminal courts for waging aggressive wars in foreign countries, wars of choice. So I don't know. It's very interesting to see that article pop up.
I don't know what it means if we're acknowledging that George Soros is funding these protests.
Interesting.
But, I did think it was a conspiracy theory heretofore.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, man. For those people who are not funded by Soros and want to get out there and protest their government for their many ghastly and appalling overreaches, why, I say more power to them. And I do like to see the signs and the honking of horns and the shaking of fists. That's always fun for me, even if I don't quite understand the rationale behind it. Same with the Women's March on Washington, D.C. I never quite understood. It's it does seem like the man won an election. I don't quite know what it is that you want, but I just love seeing all those ladies out there, shaking their fist at the man and making the people in the White House very nervous. I do really, really get a big kick out of that.
All right.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So also in the news this week, besides the exciting No Kings protest, was of course the Donald administration, the Trump administration announcing potentially doubling the size of the bailout for the Argentinian economy from $20 billion right on up to $40 billion. And of course, in the press conference, the Donald was citing ideological accord, with President Milei's libertarian philosophies. You may recall that Milei was out there with a chainsaw talking about how he was going to slash government and fix the Argentine economy by starving the beast and just firing all government administrators and cutting down the costs, shrinking the size of their budget to try to fix the ailing Argentine peso currency. Well, of course, the first layer here is that it's palpably ironic for a professed libertarian to be accepting handouts and bailouts from other from other entities. I mean, it really makes the whole libertarian project seem very silly, as if libertarianism, it gets the hot coals of libertarian get oxygen blown on them by entities that, for whatever reason, want to divest themselves of taxes. They want to shrink the federal budget so they can pay fewer taxes, and that's all well and good, except for also those same entities like rely on the government. And then, of course, there's the layer where, like, these libertarian policies never seem to go well. The Doge, obviously, it was like a disaster. Well, maybe not a disaster, but it didn't really do anything except for draw a bunch of attention to USAID and both the good and the bad things that organization has historically been doing. So that's the first layer of ridiculous irony. And then there's the part where, because of the Donald's economic saber-rattling, the Chinese have canceled all their soybean orders and won't be buying so much as a single bean from American producers and farmers in all of this year, and who knows if they'll ever buy any again, which has been a major blow to those farmers because, of course, the Chinese have a population that's 4 times the United States. It's a huge market for them to sell soybeans in, and when that market disappears, those people are screwed. They've planning on selling into the Chinese market, and now they can't because the Donald has started a tit-for-tat trade war with the Chinese, which has, of course, escalated this weekend with their announcement they wouldn't be allowing the United States to purchase rare earth minerals through their South Korean subsidiary any longer, putting us in dire straits on that front.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of questions. It's like a dubious endorsement for Trumpism that Javier Milei needs his $40 billion bailout, and yeah, and it begs the question, like, why don't we spend that money on our poor soybean farmers?
Yeah.
Do you think if we engage Trumpism on this podcast, maybe we can get a $40 billion bailout from the government?
Well, it's all about who you know. And I do think that if we were well connected on Capitol Hill, we could totally get a $40 billion bailout. And that really is the final piece to this ridiculous puzzle, and that's that our esteemed Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and his band of merry hedge fund pirates were taken in by Javier Milei's bluster and his chainsaw wielding back in 2023 when the man was first elected to office, and which we talked about on this very podcast, and they invested heavily in Argentine treasury bonds. And so it's really a bailout for Scott Bessent and his hedge fund cronies.
I see.
That's what's really going on here.
So Trump doesn't just have a $40 billion soft spot for Javier Milei.
That's what he says. But really, this is about fixing things for the well-connected. And that really, I think, is a penetrating insight into the class structure that we are forced to live in here in America, but that oddly, nobody talks about. Because these people, they're not smart at all. These people are clowns. The Scott Bessent and his hedge fund people made a catastrophic blunder because they were taken in by an idiot screaming about, slashing the federal budget as if that's going to boost the economy instead of constrict it and suffocate it. And so they bet huge amounts of money on it. And now, because they're morons, they're going to need they need the Donald to hand over this $40 billion to Argentina so that the Argentine peso doesn't fully collapse as it is wont to do, and leave them holding the bag. So that really shows how, we don't live in a meritocracy. We live, we live in a class system, and the people who are in the right class can just fail upwards, and they can do so at all the rest of our expense. Well, poor soybean farmers, who are actually tilling the soil, and planting beans and actually working, are just hung out to dry. So, very interesting to see very interested to see if the Donald can manage, if the soybean farmers can manage to get the Donald's administration to throw them a lifeline here, because it is kind of his ridiculous trade war that has screwed things up for them. It's quite a mess.
Well, I think to be fair, it's not that we don't live in a meritocracy, or it's just that meritocracy can only accomplish so much, right?
Well, meritocracy applies to plebes like you and me, but not to the august members of the ruling class who don't wish to be confronted by the consequences of their dubious actions.
Well, it's got to be crazy to have just millions of dollars or however much money you need to be able to ask the president to bail out Argentina to the tune of $40 billion so that your stock portfolio or whatever doesn't take a huge nosedive.
Yeah. The corruption is worthy of Rome herself during her twilight. Ugh. It makes the skin crawl for sure. So Ryan, I don't know if you saw the 32-hour workweek piece on breaking points that popped up.
I did.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting. Let's see, just a few hits from that breaking point piece are, in 1933, the Senate actually passed a bill. It didn't make it, through all of Congress, but the Senate passed a bill to make the standard work week 32 hours. As mentioned on this very podcast before, economist John Maynard Keynes predicted back in the 30s that we would have a 3-hour workday by the year 2030, which is now only 5 years away, but we're still laboring under the cruel lash of the man for 40 hours, Brian. It doesn't seem like that particular prediction came true, unfortunately.
We got 5 years to go.
Yeah, 5 years. A lot can happen in 5 years. I love your optimism. That's funny.
Well, I would think, after the COVID, nobody really works anymore. I don't know, a lot of places are, and the AI, I don't know, dude, it could happen.
Well, I feel like, what were they, the essential workers during COVID? Those people still had to work, the people who actually do stuff, right? And then we have this huge thick layer of bureaucracy on top of that of people who don't really do much. Well, since COVID, you got promoted into the administrative bureaucracy, which is where you want to be, right? You don't want to be one of these people that's actually stocking shelves, or driving trucks or building houses or what have you, right? You want to be the decision makers, right? You want to be the management, not the labor. The labor actually has to punch the clock and actually burn calories.
Right.
That's the worst. No one wants that. Yeah. Yes. So it is. It's interesting. The DSA now advocating for a 4-day, 32-hour work week with no reduction in pay or benefits. But it's interesting because the labor productivity in America has doubled since 1950. The workers all can do twice as much as they used to be able to do. Accounting is a great example of that. I think about what it would have taken to be an accountant in 1965 versus today. The amount of data that I can process with Microsoft Excel, it would take a room full of people to process that amount of debits and credits back in the day. But thanks to computers, it's like a prostheses that I can use to be much more effective and get a lot more work done in a very short amount of time. And so I'm sure not all fields have been so greatly enhanced by the advent of technology, but it does seem like this really gets back to the old Marxian prophecy of doom that we like to ballyhoo about in this podcast. The idea that technology will eventually obviate so much labor that the few remaining laborers will be in a tough bargaining position. They will be over a barrel, as they say, when it comes to trying to negotiate for higher wages from their employers. Well, that's all well and good if you're an employer in the short term, because you can fire all these people and keep their salaries as enhanced profits. But in the long term, those employees are also customers. And so what's really happening is each individual employer is eradicating the market for their own goods and services by firing so many of their employees, firing more and more, as many of their employees as they possibly can to maximize profits, right? So it's a contradiction that lies at the core of the aforementioned capitalist mode of production, eh?
Yes.
So it's the way, so either we just let the fruits of technology, the benefits of technology, the economic returns from the deployment of technology all accrue to a tiny minority of employers who are, in the single digits in terms of percentages. Almost everyone else, works as an employee for their living. That the 90% of us do. We can either let the small minority of us who are employers collect all the money for all the technology saves us for themselves and blow out the economy eventually, right? Or we can find some other way to distribute goods and services that's a little bit more equitable. Now, the way we've dealt with this so far is by issuing everyone a credit card, right? Right? Because workers don't have... the 1970s was really the big turning point in the U.S. economy. It was really when the New Deal began to be withdrawn off the table. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Second wave feminism, which we'll talk about, is one of those in terms of just doubling the workforce without addressing the length of the work week. But and at the same time having the demand for the supply of workers is now more or less doubled in a single decade. and the supply of workers is collapsing because of things like international jet travel or instantaneous communications, right? You can coordinate the relocation of American industry onto foreign shores like China, right? You can just move all of those factories to China, which, by the way, in the world of international geopolitics is a strategic blunder, right? To move all of your manufacturing infrastructure within the borders of your chief economic rival. I mean, that's a dunderheaded move that doesn't have many parallels in the history books. But we let it happen in the name of profit. Our hands are cuffed by this profit motive in America. We just have to do what's profitable. We don't have any other choice. And so we did. And so in the 1980s, credit cards became ubiquitous as downward pressure on wages from increased supply and decreased demand for labor, became extant. And indeed, by the time 2008 rolled around, all of the, throughout the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s and now the 2020s, the debt levels for every category of debt have ballooned. To name the category of debt is to discover a shocking new annual high each and every year, virtually for the most part, for 40 years now. And so really what we've done is we've dealt with the problem of workers not being paid enough to buy the products that keep the economy afloat for the business owners, by issuing them all credit cards and borrowing money from the business owners to try to keep the virtuous cycle going as long as possible. But the debt piles up, the interest piles up, and you just have this date with destiny that's, this countdown clock to Armageddon that's built into the whole thing.
Yeah, well, the credit cards having been all run to their limit as our previous social safety net, we've now embraced homelessness and fentanyl as our next layer of defense.
Oh, yeah. Well, you may recall that in 2020, Andrew Yang ran, he had a little presidential campaign. It's the reason that I started watching then it was Crystal and Sagar on The Hill's Rising program on YouTube, and they invited Yang on to just talk seriously about maybe doing something about this. And Crystal and Sagar took Yang seriously instead of putting a different Asian dude's face with his name or intentionally misspelling his name or just leaving him out of the polling entirely. You may remember these many shocking insults hurled at poor Andrew Yang by the mainstream media. And what was Yang's idea? It was a universal basic income that we're just going to have a floor below which you cannot fall, right? But when you stop and think about it in terms of the length of the work week, the universal basic income it's another stopgap like credit card. Now it's better than just borrowing money, until we have an Armageddon and a collapse. That is certainly a better solution than that. But it still has the demerit of creating a situation where you have a smaller and smaller pool of workers still busting their hump 40 hours a week, and then a larger and growing pool living next to them and around them of people who are idle but still getting a universal basic income. Right, so it's not quite an ideal situation. What you could do is gradually roll as technology proliferates. You could gradually roll back the length of the work week without any decrease in pay or benefits. So that way, the money saved, the labor saved by these machines that replace human blood, sweat, and tears could be distributed equitably among all strata of society and not just accrued by a tiny minority at the top. But as we learned with our friend Scott Bessent, their erstwhile Treasury Secretary, we really in America prefer to have all of our gains accrue to a tiny minority at the top and give no thought to social stability, the very strategy employed by the good people inhabiting the Roman Empire in the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. So it is it's just interesting to see the 32-hour work week being rattled around by DSA and having Breaking Points do a whole segment on it. I'd highly recommend folks check out the Breaking Points YouTube feed and go back a week or so and look up that 32-hour work week segment. The history of it is actually really fascinating. During the Industrial Revolution, we used to make people work 12-hour days in the coal mines, and children would be that's what Charles Dickens did when he was a kid. His dad was poor and went to debtor's prison in Victorian England. If you didn't pay your debts, you went to jail. And that's what happened to poor Dickens' dad. So he had to go and paste labels on bottles of boot black for 12-hour shifts. That was Dickens' childhood. And of course, that experience informs all of his stories of Ebenezer Scrooge and Tiny Tim and Oliver Twist. It is quite something. And so what happened was we had this big outpouring of socialist, Marxist, communist agitation in the late 1800s and early 1900s. In this country, we had all kinds of labor militancy, labor unrest. Obviously, the federal government, in a couple came down on the side of like the mine owners, for example, and they massacred women and children and broke strikes violently. The Ludlow massacre and the battles of Blair Mountain are two dark days in the history of dark days in labor history in the United States. But the result of all that organized, like the IWW became a huge organization here and abroad, the International Workers of the World, the Wobblies, and we had Eugene Debs run for president 3 times, the last time from jail, trying to promote these ideas. And the end of then we negotiated the work week from like children in the mines for 12 hours down to like, all right, well, it's 40 hours a week and you can have the weekend in the evenings, to actually live your life. But then we just stopped the negotiation, just kind of stopped. World War II happened. The great Etch-a-Sketch of America was shaken, and a new version of America was founded with the conclusion of World War II that we've been living in ever since. And it seems like people have amnesia about that labor history and forgotten all about it. And it's like World War II is this corner in time we cannot see around. And as a result, we lost our guardedness. We lost our class consciousness. And thanks to that, the ruling class has been rolling back the New Deal ever since, starting in the 1970s, as just described.
Yeah, I mean, we do have lost our class consciousness. It's an interesting point. I mean, there were all kind of like, socialist movements like before World War II that were all snuffed out. Yeah. And I guess through McCarthy. When was McCarthyism in like in the 50s?
Yeah, that was the 50s. But that was the second big Red Scare. There was a previous Red Scare where people feared, like the Sacco and Vanzetti trials. I think it was a shoe factory in Braintree, Mass.
Right.
I think that's right. It was a shoe factory, but anyhow, these two guys who were probably innocent got convicted of like sabotage, or they got convicted of some kind of trumped up charges. But really, what they were doing was not, they were trying to organize labor to try to get that work week down, and that was their crime. There was a huge Red Scare in like the like from like 1915 to like maybe 1920, something like that. And then the second, of course, the McCarthy era, where it really got to be. So that's where the famous quote, "Have you not an ounce of shame at last, sir?" Because McCarthy made the rounds. The Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy made the rounds, accusing anyone and everyone of being a communist, and that held a lot of sway for a while until it just got to be a real eye-rolling accusation. Like it's not everyone is a communist who disagrees with you, Senator McCarthy, and eventually the Red Scare went away. But yeah.
It's crazy that works, and that I don't know. Yeah, trying to advocate for better workers' rights basically means you're the devil. It's a very convenient idea for the political establishment.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that is central to the whole system failure constellation of ideas. The idea is that economics, the authorities define reality, and the authorities are always defining reality in ways that are convenient for them versus ways that are actually have any fidelity to reality, to actual reality. And so it's because it's like the authorities like by definition, like they're the ones that get to tell it. They're the ones that tell us what is and isn't so. And you could just see it with like the Catholic Church during the Middle Ages. They developed this theology where if you cut a check to the church, you could pay down your time in purgatory. It's like, all right, well, is that really true, or is that something that makes money for the authorities? And so our conceptions of bedrock reality themselves, because they come to us by way of the authorities, are always tainted with economic convenience. I mentioned this in the pod, I think 2 weeks ago, but like when one person is serving or waiting on another person, right? It's probable that person who's doing the waiting on, who's being waited on or served, is the one doing the fooling, and the one who's washing the feet of the person in the upper class is the one who has been fooled. And so the great con, right, the great fugazi of America, at least the post-World War II version of America, which is now starting to creak and groan and grow long in the tooth with the incidents of Israel and Hamas, right? That version of America involves this like flim flam where you don't think about the class structure of our country.
Yeah, I guess that, to go back to the No Kings protests from the top there, I guess it's just kind of what makes me cringe about the protests, and it's not, the spirit of protest or obviously acknowledging that something's wrong. It's just that, like, the messages that people are saying, it's so scattered and not, like, on point for the actual change. And, these critiques of, like, the Donald are all the same critiques you could make of any other person who was in power, ultimately, is the thing.
Yes.
And, the messaging, like, we somehow need to, like, it's just so crazy that, like, 99%erism as, like, an idea has been, like, defeated and is, like, not what people are saying at these protests.
Man, it's great that I forgot about the 99% thing. It's great that you brought that up, because it really shows. You can use that Google Ngram viewer, and we've done it live on the pod before, and just see the words like words like woke, keywords, and the whole turn. You can just see where the Occupy Wall Street movement that arose in response to the bailouts, right? More failing upwards by our upper class. In response to those bailouts, you could just see where the conversation got hijacked and turned into divisive racial messages, to where people that I know will talk. People like white people that I know will just like speak in denigrating terms about their own race, as in their rush to not be considered racist, and that really speaks to the post-World War II identity. We're supposed to be the country that goes and stops people from being put into the concentration camps. We're supposed to be the anti-racist country. I mean, we didn't know about the concentration camps until we liberated Germany, or we liberated Poland, liberated the occupied territory, first of all. And second of all, we fought World War II at a time when it was like illegal for black people to use the same water fountains as white people. But that doesn't matter. We had our civil rights movement, and we are supposed to be the anti-racist country. That is how I grew up. Like, I really thought that being a bigot would be the worst possible thing. My worst fear would be that someone might think that I was a bigot. So I understand the impulse to like denigrate being white, but it's almost like, it's
part of the divide and conquer strategy.
That's it. Yes. It's just so we don't talk about the 99% versus the 1%. Like, I don't think talking about our racial differences is nearly as fruitful as talking about our economic class differences. Oof.
It's the fugazi.
Yeah. It's thick, man. They're laying it on thick. All right, well, let's say we take a little break here, Brian, and when we come back, we'll steer the prow of this podcast into troubled waters and tackle the ever controversial issue of second wave feminism, as briefly alluded to earlier.
All right.
And we're back. All right, Brian, are you ready to plow into some choppy waters here?
Sure.
We got to talk about the role of second wave feminism in all of this business of rolling back the New Deal and demolishing the middle class and bringing us to the social and economic terminus at which we now find ourselves. Idea here is pretty simple. Well, first of all, I mean, I do think that we want to think of just with the Roman Catholic Church is a good example, right? Like, it's like people either think that the church is like evil or that the church is really, really good. And the reality is that they're both things at the same time in varying proportions as the years wear on, as the decades and millennia wear on. There are things the Catholic Church does that's really, really good, and then obviously things that they do that are horrific, almost beyond description. All right, so the idea here is not to denigrate second-wave feminism, so much as to point out that, like everything in life, there's a duality to it. There's a positive aspect and a negative aspect. So let's just start with the positive aspect, just to be a little bit even-handed here. Now, obviously, the economic system headed into the 1970s was one in which men were expected to be breadwinners and women were expected to be homemakers, and that's a fairly rigid system to have to live in. And I guess the general feeling in America is, as the civil rights movement of the 1960s came to a close, that it was time to address the next great injustice that was crying out to be addressed, and that would seem to be this super rigid system that systematically excludes women from the workplace and from the military, that has been in existence since the agricultural revolution or whatever. The thing about homemaking is that it's like, I just kind of think of kin work as if it's just a term for things that laborers, like if you go to work and clean 500 toilets, well, that's like working for an employer. But when you're cleaning your own toilet, it has a different meaning. Like it feels good to be tidy and clean up your bathroom. And although it's not necessarily that you enjoy scrubbing feces out your toilet bowl, it's just that it feels, the work has meaning because you're having good hygiene and keeping good practices and being disciplined and, like going for a run or something like that. It feels good. And like kin work is, I don't know, when I think of kin work, I think of like Thanksgiving dinner or like grandma making cookies. Like it's everyone's favorite kind of work. No one really cares so much about the poor airport attendant who cleans 500 toilets in a day. We just kind of overlook that person. But the person who does kin work in your house, hopefully you participate and you feel grateful when other people do kin work, and you also feel good when you do kin work on behalf of other people. Should be a virtuous cycle of humanity, at its best, ideally. And that's really what homemaking is. And then the other thing to note about kin work is that it's economically critical. Like you will not have a next generation of workers. If you're from an employer perspective, you will not be having an army of workers to work in your factory in 20 years if you don't have people performing kin work in the here and now to make sure those children grow up into functional adults and have warm homes and the things that we seem to kind of be lacking in society today. But the problem again is that women were expected to do all the kin work and men were expected to do all the breadwinning, and there was no flexibility for men who preferred to be homemakers or for women who preferred to be breadwinners. Those people were just SOL, right? And so that situation definitely was addressed successfully by second wave feminism to the great betterment of society. I think we can acknowledge that. So far, so good, Brian?
Yes. Are we gonna tackle the question of like first versus second wave feminism and like what that means?
That's a great point. I hadn't thought we would, but now that you mention it, some people might not be familiar with the term second wave feminism. So first wave feminism is the suffragette movement, where it's like women don't have the right to vote. And so it's like, yeah, I think maybe we ought to, like the ideal of democracy, maybe we ought to enfranchise, all of society instead of just half. Obviously it would seem to make sense, right? And second wave feminism is like, all right, well, also we shouldn't have a rigid society where one gender, just by dint of being of that particular gender, has to do all the breadwinning, and one gender just by dint of being that gender has to do all of the homemaking, right? That's second wave feminism. Think about Murphy Brown going to work in that 1970 sitcom. That's it. And then third wave feminism is whatever we got today. I'm not really clear on what that is exactly. It's not really sure what we're doing with third wave feminism, but that's the modern version. This is like the post Occupy Wall Street third wave feminism. And whatever it is, maybe it's that men are just evil or something like that. I don't really know. But it does seem like it's been totally cool the past 10 or 15 years to just denigrate men and talk about toxic masculinity without ever talking about positive masculinity, right? And meanwhile, no one ever talks about toxic femininity, but we do talk about positive femininity because obviously all four of those categories clearly exist, right?
Well, I think a neutral way to put it would be that third wave feminism is like trying to like elevate the number of women who like go to college and are like in management positions at companies, and
okay. That's a good
something like that.
That's a little more fair. I like that better. That's a little more fair and balanced. We do have women are now the majority of degree winners in college, right? The majority of college degrees go to women these days. The majority of college students are women. It's like the tide has, swung greatly in their direction, and that's good to see. Yeah, so it's like, so I like the way you put that. Very good. Okay, but we just talked about the 32-hour work week in the first half of this show, right? And the problem here, as mentioned during the 32-hour work week segment, right? The problem is that we have doubled the supply of labor without addressing the length of the work week, right? What we could have done was just removed the rigid social construct that women are homemakers and men are breadwinners, and just said, all right, well, we've got to protect our society here. We've got to protect the middle class that is the envy of the entire world, right? And we didn't do that. Instead, we just had the Gloria Steinem version of second wave feminism. Gloria Steinem, who wrote an article saying my years as a spook, who received funding from CIA for Ms. Magazine, which was a CIA cutout, right? So, right, what's happening here is, as usual, CIA is like the intelligence services. They're like the other side. There's like they're always supporting the business community, right? When some people in like Nicaragua get a funny idea about how maybe the farm should be owned by Nicaraguan citizens and not by the United Fruit Company, and start organizing and agitating on that to that effect, well, you send in the CIA to assassinate the leaders as communists, right, and install a right-wing strongman who will crack the whip and make everyone get back to work and not talk about redistributing property in any equitable way, right? This is all this fruit, all the money made off of this fruit or sugarcane or oil in the Caribbean and South America, what have you. That's all the property of American corporations, and anyone who says otherwise needs to be assassinated with CIA bullets, right?
They always know the worst things to do, the CIA.
Yeah, that's a great quote from that Bad Santa book, not bad. What was it called? The Evil Santa book by Dean Koontz. He always knows the worst thing to do.
Well, it's the guy from A Christmas Story. It's not Dean Koontz, is it?
Yeah, it's
John Shepard or something like that, right?
Gene Shepard, but it's not from A Christmas Story. He always knows the worst things to do is Dean Koontz, the thriller. The thriller writer. He wrote this Christmas book for kids. It has paintings in it, and then it's a poem. And the evil Santa sneaks into the house. It's like the Grinch Redux. He sneaks into the house, and he writes on the children's artwork on the fridge. He wrote the word poo. He always knows the worst things to do. That's the line.
Yeah.
So that's great. I really like that. I'm going to steal that. That's really funny. Yes, the CIA always knows the worst things to do. They're here to. In other words, the CIA is here. They are a key part of the Fugazi that keeps alive the class structure from which Mr. Scott Bessent benefits so handily, right? And so that's why they wanted to make sure that rather than addressing the problem, the rigidity that was so uncomfortable for women who wanted to be breadwinners and for men who wanted to be homemakers, they addressed that. They made sure that this was addressed in a way that was going to make a crazy amount of money for the upper class of employers in this country, and that's exactly what they did. Right? Rather than we could have said, all right, well, we need to have a little talk about the fact that all women are homemakers and all men are breadwinners. We need to dissolve that boundary, and what we're going to do is just drop the work week to 20 hours so that whatever your gender is, whatever your preference is between homemaking and breadwinning, you have the ability to do half and half. So you could have a house where the woman works, 2 jobs at 40 hours, and the man does the homemaking, or you could have a job where each parent would maybe do 20 hours and then 20 hours of breadwinning and 20 hours of homemaking. What you would do, in other words, is continue the erosion of the length of the work week that was going on with all the labor agitation pre-World War II. Well, we didn't do that. Instead, we just sent all the women to work and all the men alongside the men to receive their capitalist exploitation, and that has led to that's been a major force in the destruction of the middle class here. One major feature of that second wave feminism movement was to glorify labor, right? Like the girl boss jobs, the fun jobs, the lawyer, doctor, what have you, the CEO. That's all well and good. But really the majority of jobs are exploitative in a capitalist system, right? The point here being that if your employer pays you the actual value of your labor, then your employer has no way to turn a profit or to cover the overhead of the business. So it's you would not be a employer for long if you paid people the actual value of their labor, right? By definition, right, you are submitted to exploitation in the workplace. And so the idea here was to glorify labor and to get women to volunteer to go out and submit to capitalist exploitation and put their children in daycare, while both parents work, which is the reality we grew up in, And so what are the horrifying results of that version of second wave feminism, the CIA version of second wave feminism that we got instead of an egalitarian version? Well, now no one can be a homemaker. Everyone has to go to work, right? Well, what happens is housing prices skyrocket. Why? In the 70s and 80s and 90s, if you're a couple bidding on a house, you can put 2 incomes on your mortgage applications, and you can outbid people that only have 1 income on their mortgage application by and large, right? That causes the price of housing. You can borrow more money, and the housing prices reflect how much people can borrow to pay for those houses, right? They reflect the availability of credit. And so you get the housing prices are bid up to where you almost now must have two incomes on a mortgage application. You got to be real successful to be able to afford any of these $500,000 houses on a single income. You really have to have two. And that has handcuffed us into a situation where previously women who preferred to be breadwinners and not homemakers were handcuffed. Now women who prefer to be homemakers and not breadwinners are similarly handcuffed, and men who prefer to be homemakers and not breadwinners are handcuffed. So it's really screwed up. It's been a huge factor in the demolition of the middle class. The other thing that happened, of course, is with both parents working all the time, you really increase the stress in the household, and the divorce rates have skyrocketed. You and I are children of divorce, Brian. Our parents both worked in the same business together. Not sure if that had anything to do with their divorce. I suspect probably it did. But whatever the case may be, whatever our particular case may be, obviously, that drastically increases the divorce rate. It's a major factor in burgeoning divorce rates in America. And of course, with children being removed from their parents' care for most of their childhood, you see children becoming less and less. The Wall Street Journal comments complain about this all the time. How poorly the new generations are, how poorly they perform at work, how they're not really focused, and they're not really, let's just say the number of societal ills that come from having children untended by their parents for most of their childhood is a lot. You end up with latchkey kids, on ADD medications, addicted to phones or vapes or video games, and it just becomes a rough situation. A lot of the carnage we see around us is the result of just not having parents at home, because now both parents have to go to work to afford housing. That's really and of course we have the bifurcation of wealth as a result of the skyrocketing housing prices. Remember, every time you buy a house, you also buy a second house for the bank, because the interest that you're paying, you're buying like a second house. And so obviously mortgage debt is the biggest category of debt other than sovereign debt in this country. I mean, it's just it's way bigger than credit cards, way bigger than auto loans, way bigger than student loans. It's a huge business. A lot of people make a lot of money off the interest on these mortgages. And just the general erosion of the middle class has meant a bifurcation of wealth that, again, worthy of the darkest days of the Roman Empire. So, yeah.
Well, I think it's a divide and conquer strategy, and I guess the idea is that women are more oppressed than men is the fuel for this whole movement.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that really, it feels like it's borrowing a page from the civil rights movement that directly preceded it. To your point.
Yeah, and so I don't know. Well, it's not like a unifying message, and so it pulls people apart. What we should do is advocate for a 32-hour work week, or something like that. Yeah, or a 20-hour work week, or something like that. Yeah. So that was another key. Also, in addition to glorifying labor, one of the key ideas that came out of second wave feminism. Really, this idea goes back to the William Penn and the Quakers in the late 1600s. This idea that women are historically oppressed. It's an idea that gained steam and really became a cultural consensus with second wave feminism. And the idea is that women have been historically oppressed. And there is some truth to that, but I do think that if you brought a woman from the 15th century into the present and explained to them that they're oppressed, they would have no idea what you're talking about, But being excused from both the battlefield and the workplace, right? That could be a form of oppression if you are the sort of person that has a mind to go into the battlefield or the workplace, right? They could also be considered unimaginable privilege to be excused from the horrors of the battlefield and the workplace, the capitalist exploitation of the workplace. It really depends on the individual. So this really gets back to our broader theme of looking at things, seeing that it's not that A is true and B is not true, or that B is true and A is not true. You have to be able to kind of see both things at the same time, right? And I guess one of the ways in which this brings me to the idea of the patriarchy. And I do think that the patriarchy really is an example of women being historically oppressed. But I think the thing to do is to just, what I'd like to do here is just kind of dive into the reasons why.
And I think you need to look no further than this article that I have here. This really tells the story. It's a 2015 article from the Pacific Standard, and it is entitled. The title tells you everything you need to know. The title is 8,000 years ago, 17 women reproduced for every one man. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, so I just wrote a little summary here. Where female chimps are virtually indiscriminate in their mating habits, human females are highly selective. Generally speaking, women prefer to share the very best men with other women rather than settle for a less than top man. Our genetic code makes this undeniable, as evidenced in the Pacific Standard article. We all have many more female ancestors than male ancestors because women were all sharing a small minority of sperm donors, right? Now you can see this in, have you ever seen the graphs of how women rate men on Tinder? The Tinder, whatever the company is that owned Tinder did a big study, and they reported that where men rate the women on the dating apps according to a pretty normal distribution curve, right? But women do not rate men that way. Whereas we see, well, all right, this woman's a 1, this woman's a 5, this woman's a 10. They see almost all men as 0s and 1s, except for a few. It's all loaded up. It's all loaded to the low end, except for a few top men. So it's like everyone should look this thing up on the internet. It really shows how women view the average man is much lower than you would think given the number of men that they're rating, right? In other words, the women's perception, even if you were average in terms of the actual rankings, they're going to perceive you as a 1 or a 2. So you really have to be like perfect to get rated like a really perfect to get a 10. In other words, women are much more choosy and selective than their male counterparts. Well, what does this mean from an economic perspective? Well, it is true that there have been many egalitarian societies in the past, and there have been also some matriarchal societies. You can look them up on the internet. They're fairly obscure, and like egalitarian societies, they don't compete well with patriarchal societies, right? Patriarchal societies have things like they have this. I'm just going to read. This is Deuteronomy chapter 22, verses 20 through 21. The passage reads, "But if this thing be true, and the tokens of virginity be not found for the damsel, then they shall bring out the damsel to the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her with stones that she die, because she hath wrought folly in Israel, to play the whore in her father's house. So shalt thou put evil away from among you." I mean, that is horrific. Stoning people to death, stoning women to death because they're not virgins, right? That is clearly a way in which women have historically been oppressed, right? That is just male, what do you call it? Male promiscuity, not punished like female promiscuity. But when you think about how agricultural societies are structured, well, the issue here is that a society that forces women on pain of death to be virgins on their wedding night is essentially forcing women rather than sharing a top man, they now have to pair off one by one, and you get these married couples. Your society is comprised of married couples versus one strong man with a harem, and every other man just being SOL with no family whatsoever. And so this forces monogamy on the women in a hideously oppressive way, but that has the effect of enfranchising the bottom 80% of men who otherwise would have no family to provide for and no reason to start a farm or to produce a economic surplus. And that's really what I'm driving at here. When you talk about which civilizations conquer other civilizations, like for example, when white settlers conquered the Indians of North America, it wasn't because of the guns, germs, and steel that Jared Diamond likes to write about. I mean, initially it was. Obviously, pathogens wiped out huge portions of the population, and they didn't have horses, and they didn't have firearms. But by the time you get to the 1800s, like the Apache had mastered both the horse and the firearm to great effect. But what the Apache couldn't do was create supply lines that supply armies of tens of thousands of soldiers 3 hot meals a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, year after year after year. Or you can just have these professional armies that are just in the field indefinitely. And if your society allows the bottom 80% of men to be disenfranchised, then you will just never be able to compete with that. And that's really like this horrible idea, this horrible patriarchal idea. It gets propagated because it's effective at a nuts and bolts level. It allows agricultural societies to conquer their neighbors who haven't enfranchised their entire male populations. So it's like, it's just by dint of its effectiveness, that's why this idea gets passed down generation after generation after generation. And people who want to run egalitarian or even matriarchal societies just get subsumed. They cannot compete. So that's really that's what I think is a balanced look at second wave feminism and the patriarchy. I don't know. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah. So, like, historically, society has like propagated itself by channeling the reproductive energy of women, right? With the aforementioned, Deuteronomy,
with violent injunctions.
And I guess I guess what you could do is you could put guardrails on. You could try to channel like male promiscuity, but it's like harder to verify, right? But you could just say like, dudes, don't bang any hot chicks, right?
Yeah, there is some of that. You're supposed to try to be monogamous according to the Bible, but it's just not mission critical. It's just I told you there's got to be some other way to do this.
There's credence to like the feminist idea because the guardrails are on like we're trying to channel women's reproductive energy and basically letting men do their thing. Although that's not completely true. There's something certainly going on with that.
I think men are much more content to be paired off one to one. Like when Tinder does the graphs and we rate our women according to a normal distribution of attractiveness, we don't prefer it. It makes sense from a like pre-agricultural Darwinian evolution. It makes total sense that women would rather they're looking for someone who can like protect them and provide for them when they're pregnant and vulnerable, right? That's 9 months is just the beginning in a hunter-gatherer society because you have to walk all year long. You're constantly following the herds of wildebeest or whatever. And so being pregnant, it's not just 9 months. It's like until your child can walk on their own, you're kind of like defenseless. You have this like you're caring for this baby that's strapped to your back, and you're in a vulnerable. It's going to be hard to get the food and security that you need to ensure the well-being of your offspring. You want like a really strong man to be there to provide for you, and I guess it's not so much of a deal breaker for them if that strong man also has other women in his harem. Whereas for men, we're just not going to till the field all day long for a child that may or may not be our own. Right? We don't know. That's one thing about concealed ovulation. You just don't know. There's no, in pre-agricultural societies, lines of male paternity couldn't really be traced. There wasn't monogamy, right? There was just a lot of sex and a lot of children, and they were just kind of the tribe's children. You wouldn't really, everyone knew who their mother was, but people didn't really know who their dads were, right? That's a egalitarian society. And it's got to be a happier way to live, but it cannot compete with 24, for 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. 52 weeks a year supply lines militarily. You just cannot compete with right. It's like that economic surplus you get by enfranchising all the men that otherwise would be left out in the cold with no family. That economic surplus is key to the ability to have a division of labor that gives us the lives we live today, right? The division of labor is critical for civilization. So it's like civilization itself is based on we owe everything that we are and understand to this horrific patriarchal structure. And so it's just interesting to note that it's obviously horrifying, but at the same time we like owe our lives to it. You just can't you just will not have the large populations and the food to feed those large populations that can be militarily successful. It's why the agricultural revolution swept the globe. It's these kinds of horrific patriarchal cruel injunctions that have done it.
Well, I think there's probably some kind of idea like 99%erism really undercuts, I think, sort of like the racial divide, but it doesn't quite do it in like the war of the sexes kind of way, though. And so there must be some idea that can rectify the situation. Now, there's got to be a way in which like men and women can like work together better. and I'm just not sure what it is.
Well, wouldn't like a 20-hour work week do it? Wouldn't if you slash the work week in half and give couples a chance to be home with their children, and you can if the work week is half what it is today, if let's say we still consider 40 hours to be full-time work. Well, if suddenly you only have to be at work till noontime or from noontime to 5 p.m., well then that's no problem. Like people can choose. You can pair up with a young lady or a young lad who shares your. Like if you are a man who prefers to be a homemaker, you could have that option. And if you could marry a woman who prefers to be a breadwinner, and you could be happy. But the way that the second wave feminism was deployed means that really both parents got to go to work, and their child's got to be raised by daycare, and that is a disaster. It's a social disaster for the lower classes, and it's a major economic boon for the upper classes.
Well, there's sort of a contradiction there, right? Because channeling female reproductive energy the way we have is what's resulted in this first, second, and third wave feminism, right?
Yeah, yes.
And so to change that, is going to be it's going to be tricky.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what the history of the 20th century shows.
The way that we're harnessing reproductive energy right now is like creating more exploitation of the 99%.
Yeah.
And so so how do you fundamentally change it? But definitely changing the work week situation would improve the situation. So to change the work week, you'd have to be like in control of the government, which obviously we're not. So maybe the key is to get more people to like listen to Breaking Points or something like that.
Yeah.
Or podcasts like this one.
Yeah, it would be my dream that these No Kings protests would revert to a more Occupy Wall Street flavor, 1% versus 99% flavor. That you, rather than just kind of floundering with not a coherent message, we could get back to the labor agitation that characterized the early 20th century in America, and that I do think that the feminism and the reason that feminism has failed is because of a lack of class consciousness, or to the extent that it's failed has been due to a lack of class consciousness. We have gotten rid of old guardrails that were oppressive, but also at the same time were really important for keeping society functioning in an equitable way. And so, that's the real issue here. I think that feminism has taken place in a total vacuum of any kind of class consciousness, and that's what we need to bring back. That's the seasoning that our stew is missing. We got to bring that back so that we can. So we can keep society sustainable rather than having this perpetual sense of things getting worse and approaching climax, and this fall of Rome feeling that everyone has, that our society is getting visibly getting worse and worse with each passing day or week. I think that class consciousness is like a panacea for all of these problems we talked about today, and that's what we got to be better about promoting. And it's like people got to not be shy to crack a Karl Marx book, not because you're going to agree with it 100%, but because because criticism can be extremely constructive, and there are some valuable criticisms of the capitalist system included in those books that Americans are just like ghastly ignorant of.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds like a plan. That's a start anyway.
Yeah. Well, I guess we should leave it there, Brian. That's what I'm feeling. What do you reckon?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, then I will just invite everyone to join us over at systemfailure.org. There you can read the weekly essays written by yours truly on this very matter of how economics defines the reality in which we live. It defines the background, the platform, of the milieu of our lives. There at systemfailure.org, you can enter in your email to receive those weekly essays written by yours truly directly in your email inbox each and every Sunday morning. And furthermore, if you'd like to get in touch with either Brian or myself and let us know how offensive our views are, we would love to hear from you. Just click on over to the About page at systemfailure.org and click the appropriate name. Alrighty, folks. Have a great week. We'll see you all next week for another regularly scheduled.
See ya.